You know, after more than 40 years sitting on this bench, I've learned something that still surprises people. The law doesn't meet people at their best. It meets them exactly where life has dropped them. And one morning, a man stood in my courtroom and said something so simple, so honest, that it stopped me cold. But before I tell you this whole story, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share with you is something that needs to be heard. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word of this. I've been a judge in Providence for over 40 years. Every morning I wake up early, long before the city fully stirs. I make my coffee the same way I always have. Strong, black, no sugar. I sit quietly for a few minutes reading the paper, thinking about the day ahead. After all these years, the routine grounds me. My father used to tell me, "Frank, people don't come to court because life is going well. They come because something went wrong." He came to this country with nothing but hope and a willingness to work. That lesson shaped how I see every person who stands before me. That particular morning felt ordinary at first. I arrived at the courthouse at 8:15, just like I've done thousands of times before. I walked past the officers, nodded to familiar faces, and stepped into my courtroom. I could smell the coffee Christina had already brought in. She knows exactly how I like it. She always has. I sat down at my bench and began reviewing the day's cases: parking violations, registration issues, minor fines. On paper, nothing unusual, but I've learned not to trust paper. Paper doesn't tell you who's barely holding on. As I flipped through the files, one caught my attention. Parking violation, failure to pay, vehicle-related citation. Nothing dramatic. But there was a note scribbled in the margin that made me pause. Defendant claims vehicle is primary residence. I remember thinking to myself, "Pay attention, Frank." Christina greeted me and asked if I was ready to begin. I nodded. I always am, but something in my chest felt heavier than usual, like the day was waiting to teach me something. The courtroom filled slowly. People sat quietly, clutching documents, whispering to family members, staring at the floor. I've seen that look countless times. Anxiety mixed with hope, fear mixed with dignity. The first few cases moved quickly. People explained themselves. Some took responsibility, some needed guidance. I listened to every word, because listening is the most powerful thing a judge can do. Then Christina called the next name. I looked up. I saw a man slowly make his way forward. He moved carefully, like his body was tired, not injured, just worn down. His clothes were clean, but clearly old. His jacket had seen better days. His shoes were scuffed and uneven at the heels. What struck me most was his face. I saw exhaustion there, deep exhaustion, the kind that doesn't come from a bad night's sleep, but from too many bad nights in a row. I could tell immediately he was nervous, not defensive, not angry, just unsure. I asked him to step closer. I kept my voice calm, gentle. I wanted him to know this was a conversation, not an interrogation. I asked him how he was doing. He hesitated before answering. Then he said, "I'm doing my best, Your Honor." That answer stayed with me. I asked him if he understood why he was here. He nodded slowly. He said he received a ticket for sleeping in his car. He said he didn't have the money to pay the fine. He said he tried to explain that his car wasn't just a car. I leaned forward slightly. I asked him to explain that to me. He took a breath, a deep one, like he had been holding it in all morning. Then he said the words that I will never forget. He said, "Your Honor, my car is my home." The courtroom went silent. I felt my chest tighten. I looked at him closely now. I noticed the lines in his face, the way his hands were clasped together, the way he stood straight, even while admitting something so vulnerable. I asked him how long he had been living in his car. He looked down for a moment before answering. Then he said, "Almost a year." I could hear murmurs in the gallery. people shifting in their seats. This wasn't just another case anymore. I asked him what happened. He didn't rush his answer. He didn't dramatize it. He told me he lost his job during a slow season. He told me rent fell behind. One missed payment became two. Two became eviction. He said he tried shelters, but they were full. Some nights felt safer in his car. I listened, every word. I asked him if he worked now. He said yes, part-time, whatever he could get, day labor, cleaning, odd jobs. He said he showered when he could. He said he tried to stay invisible. That word hit me, invisible. I asked him why he didn't tell the officer this when he received the ticket. He said he tried. He said the officer wasn't unkind, but rules were rules. I nodded. I've learned something in 40 years. Rules are necessary, but rules without understanding can become cruel. I asked him how much the fine was. He told me. It wasn't much on paper, but I could see it might as well have been a mountain to him. I asked him what would happen if he paid it. He answered honestly. He said he wouldn't be able to afford gas to get to work. He said he'd have to choose between paying the fine and eating. I felt my throat tighten. I thought about my father again, about sleeping in cramped apartments when he first arrived, about working long days for little pay, about dignity. I looked at the man standing before me and thought, this could be anyone. I told him I appreciated his honesty. I told him it took courage to say what he said. I told him this court exists to uphold the law, but also to recognize humanity. His eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink them away. I hadn't made a decision yet, but I already knew one thing. This case was not about a parking ticket. It was about survival. And as I sat there looking at this man who called his car his home, I knew the rest of the courtroom was watching, waiting to see what justice would look like today. After the man told me his car was his home, I didn't speak right away. I've learned that sometimes silence is the most respectful response. It gives people space to breathe, and it gives the truth time to settle. I looked down at his file again, then back up at him. On paper, this was a simple parking violation. In real life, it was anything but simple. I could feel the room leaning in. Even the people waiting for their own cases were paying attention now. I asked him his name. He told me. I asked how old he was. He hesitated, then answered. He wasn't much younger than my own children. That hit me harder than I expected. I asked him if he had any family nearby. He said no. He said his parents had passed years ago. He said he had a sister in another state, but she was struggling too. He didn't want to be a burden. That word again, burden. I asked him where he parked his car at night. He said wherever he thought he wouldn't be noticed. Industrial areas, quiet streets. He said he moved often so no one would complain. I listened carefully. I always do, because people don't open up like this unless they feel safe. I asked him what kind of car it was. He told me. Old, high mileage, reliable, he said, as long as he took care of it. I asked him what would happen if he lost it. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, I don't know, Your Honor. I really don't. That answer stayed with me. I looked around my courtroom. I thought about how many people drive cars every day without a second thought. How many people see them as transportation, not shelter. Perspective changes everything. I asked him how he kept going, how he didn't give up. He shrugged slightly and said something that surprised me. He said, every morning I wake up and tell myself I'm still here. That means I still have a chance. I felt a lump form in my throat. I've seen anger in my courtroom. I've seen frustration. I've seen entitlement. But quiet resilience like that always gets to me, because it's the hardest thing to carry. I explained the law to him. I told him why the citation existed. I told him why sleeping in vehicles was prohibited in certain areas. He nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't interrupt. He accepted it. That mattered. I asked him if he had tried to contest the ticket earlier. He said no. He said he didn't know how. He said court felt intimidating. He said he almost didn't show up today. I asked him why he did. He looked at me and said, because if I don't try, Nothing changes. That's when I felt something shift inside me. I leaned forward and rested my hands on the bench. I wanted him to know I was fully present. I told him something I've learned over the years. I said, the hardest thing in life isn't falling down. It's standing back up when no one's watching. His eyes filled with tears again. He didn't wipe them away this time. I could hear soft murmurs behind him. People whispering, not judgment, sympathy. This man had reminded everyone in that room of something important. I told him I needed a moment. I looked down at the law. I looked down at the options available to me. I've always believed that the law should be applied fairly, but never blindly. I thought about my father again, about how close he came to homelessness more than once, about how one kind landlord changed everything for him. Life often turns on moments like that. I asked the man one more question. I said, if I give you some help today, what will you do with it? He didn't hesitate. He said, I'll keep working, I'll keep saving, and I'll keep believing this isn't the end of my story. That answer mattered more than any document in his file. I looked up at Christina. She was watching closely. She always does. I could see she felt it too. This wasn't just another case. I turned back to the man and told him I wasn't going to fine him today. I told him I was dismissing the ticket. I told him I wasn't going to punish someone for surviving. For a second, he didn't react, like he didn't trust what he heard. Then it hit him. His shoulders dropped. His knees almost buckled. He had to steady himself on the podium. Tears ran down his face freely now, not shame, relief. He said thank you over and over. I gently asked him to stop. I told him he didn't owe me gratitude. I told him he owed himself belief. I dismissed his case. As he stepped away, I watched him walk a little taller, a little steadier, like someone had lifted a weight off his back. That's a feeling you never forget. But as he returned to the gallery to gather his things, something happened that made my stomach tighten. I heard a sharp laugh. It came from the back of the courtroom. I looked up. I saw a woman sitting there with her arms crossed, shaking her head. She leaned toward the person next to her and whispered something. Then she laughed again. I saw it clearly. Disdain. I felt my jaw tighten. I've seen that look before. The look that says, why is he getting help? The look that says, rules should be rules when they benefit me. I made a mental note. Christina leaned toward me and quietly told me the next case was hers. I looked down at the file. Failure to comply, missed payments, dismissive attitude noted by officers. I looked back up at the woman. She was already standing, and I remember thinking to myself, this day isn't finished teaching its lesson yet. After I noticed that laugh, I couldn't ignore it. I didn't react right away. I've learned over the years that not every moment needs an immediate response. But I never forget them either. Moments like that reveal character. I looked down at the file in front of me and then back up at the woman who was now standing confidently at the podium. She walked forward with purpose, like this was an inconvenience she intended to finish quickly. I could tell right away she expected this to be easy. I asked her how she was doing today. She sighed and said she was frustrated to be here. I nodded and asked her why. She said she had better things to do. She said she didn't understand why she even needed to appear in person. She said the whole thing was a waste of time. I listened carefully, not just to her words, but to her tone. Tone tells you far more than people realize. I asked her if she understood why she had been cited. She said yes, but she said it shouldn't matter. She said she had paid tickets before. She said this one slipped through the cracks. I looked down at the record. Multiple notices, missed deadlines, no response. I asked her if she thought ignoring court notices was acceptable. She shrugged. That shrug told me more than any explanation could have. I thought back to the man who had just stood in front of me. The way he spoke carefully, the way he explained his situation without excuses, the way he took responsibility even when life hadn't been fair to him. The contrast was striking. I asked her what she did for work. She gave me an answer quickly, too quickly. I asked her income range. She laughed and said it didn't matter. I leaned forward slightly and told her it did matter, because the court considers ability to pay when determining consequences. She rolled her eyes. I could hear a quiet murmur ripple through the gallery. People notice these things. They always do. I asked her why she had laughed earlier. She looked surprised, then defensive. She said she wasn't laughing at anyone. She said people should follow the rules. She said if someone couldn't afford to live somewhere, they shouldn't break the law. I felt my chest tighten. I took a slow breath and chose my words carefully. I said there's a difference between breaking the law and trying to survive. She crossed her arms and said rules were rules. I nodded. Then I said something I've learned over 40 years. I said, rules are meant to guide us, not strip us of humanity. She looked unimpressed. I asked her a simple question. I said, do you believe compassion has a place in the justice system? She paused, just for a second. Then she said, that's not my problem. The room went quiet. I felt a familiar weight settle in my chest. Not anger, disappointment. I've seen this before, when someone believes the law exists to protect them, but not others. I reminded myself to stay centered. My role wasn't to argue. My role was to apply the law fairly and wisely. I reviewed her case carefully. The fines were legitimate. The notices were clear. She had the means to address the issue and chose not to. I explained that to her calmly. I told her the court expected accountability. I told her dismissiveness was not a defense. She scoffed. That's when I noticed something else. I saw a man stand up slowly in the gallery. He was wearing a plain suit, conservative, no flash. I recognized the look immediately. I asked him to identify himself. He said he was an assistant U.S. attorney. The room shifted. I asked him if he had something to add. He said he was observing. That was all he said. But it was enough. I felt my instincts kick in. In 40 years, I've learned when something is about to change direction. I looked back at the woman and asked her to state her full name for the record. She did. Her confidence wavered just slightly. I asked her employer again. She hesitated before answering this time. I noticed. I asked her if she was aware of any ongoing investigations involving her department. Her face went pale. She said she didn't know what I was talking about. I took a breath. I wasn't accusing. I was observing. The law has a way of revealing itself without force. I turned to the assistant U.S. attorney and asked if he wished to make a statement. He nodded. He said there was an ongoing federal inquiry. He said certain behaviors had raised red flags. He said cooperation and attitude mattered. I watched the woman's posture change. Her arms dropped. Her confidence cracked. The laughter from earlier felt very far away now. I thought about the man who said his car was his home, about how he had nothing, yet stood with dignity, and now I was watching someone with everything struggle to stand at all. I addressed the woman calmly. I said, this court doesn't measure people by what they own. It measures them by how they conduct themselves when faced with responsibility. She didn't respond. I dismissed her case according to the law. No reduction, no sympathy, just consequence. As she turned to leave, I saw her glance back toward the man whose ticket I had dismissed earlier. Their eyes met briefly. He looked away, not out of pride, out of humility. That moment said everything. I sat there quietly after she left. I removed my glasses and rubbed my eyes. I felt the emotional weight of the morning press down on me. 2 people, 2 circumstances, 2 attitudes, one left with hope, the other left with fear. And I realized something I want you to understand clearly. Justice isn't about treating everyone the same. It's about treating everyone fairly. I nodded to Christina and told her to call the next case. But deep down, I knew the most important lessons of that day were still unfolding. After I told Christina to call the next case, the courtroom slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Papers shuffled, people stood, voices echoed briefly and then faded. But something had changed. You could feel it. The room had witnessed something real, and that kind of moment doesn't disappear easily. I kept thinking about the man who said his car was his home. I wondered where he would park that night. I wondered if he'd sleep a little easier knowing the fine wasn't hanging over his head anymore. Sometimes relief is the difference between giving up and holding on. Case after case moved forward, but my mind drifted. I've learned to manage that over the years. You don't ignore your thoughts, you acknowledge them and then refocus. That's part of staying human in a job that demands constant judgment. During a short break, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. I heard the quiet hum of the building. I smelled the last of my coffee, and I thought about how close any one of us can come to the edge without warning. My father used to tell me, "Frank, security is fragile. Never look down on someone who's fallen because tomorrow could be you." Those words echoed in my mind that morning. Christina came over and told me the man was still in the hallway. He wanted to say thank you before he left. I nodded and asked her to let him in. When he walked back into my courtroom, he stood awkwardly at first, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be there anymore. I told him it was fine. I could see he was emotional, trying to hold himself together. He thanked me again. He said he hadn't felt heard in a long time. He said most people didn't look at him anymore. They looked past him. That hurt to hear. I told him something I believe deeply. I said, "You matter, whether people acknowledge it or not, and you did the right thing by showing up today." He nodded, eyes wet, and told me he planned to keep working, to save, to find a room somewhere. Nothing fancy, just a door that locked and a place to rest. I felt a tightness in my chest. I told him to take care of himself. I told him not to give up. I told him that dignity isn't measured by what you own, but by how you face hardship. He thanked me one last time and left. After he was gone, I sat quietly again. I thought about the woman who had scoffed earlier, about how differently people react when they think the system exists only to serve them, about how compassion can feel threatening to those who've never needed it. I've seen this pattern many times. When someone has never struggled, they often confuse privilege with merit. They think success is proof of worth. It's not. Character is. I returned to my work, but that contrast stayed with me all afternoon. Later that day, after court adjourned, I went back to my chambers and loosened my tie. I sat down slowly. It had been one of those days, the kind that drains you, not physically, but emotionally. Christina knocked on the door and asked if I was okay. I told her I was. I just needed a moment. She smiled knowingly. She's been by my side a long time. She understands that some cases follow you home, whether you want them to or not. That evening, when I got home, my wife noticed right away. She asked how my day had been. I told her about the man. I told her about his car. I told her about how he said it was his home. She listened quietly. Then she said something simple. She said, "That could have been anyone." She was right. We sat together for a while without talking. Some stories don't need commentary. They need space. That night, lying in bed, I thought about the meaning of shelter, how something as ordinary as a roof can feel like a luxury when it's gone, how quickly life can change with one missed paycheck, one unexpected expense. I thought about how easy it is to judge from the outside, and how hard it is to survive on the inside. The next morning, I returned to the courthouse with those thoughts still with me, and that's when I learned something that stopped me in my tracks. Christina told me the assistant U.S. attorney from the day before was back in the building. My instincts immediately went on alert. I asked her to let me know when he was ready to speak. I felt that familiar sense again, that feeling that the story wasn't finished yet. I didn't know then how quickly things were about to escalate. I didn't know what would be revealed, but I knew one thing. Sometimes the smallest cases open the biggest doors, and the law, when it works the way it's supposed to, has a way of showing us exactly who we are. That morning, after Christina told me the assistant U.S. attorney was back in the building, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. After 4 decades on this bench, I've learned to trust that feeling. It doesn't come often, but when it does, it usually means something important is about to surface. I asked Christina to send him to my chambers during the next break. I tried to focus on the cases in front of me, but my mind kept drifting back to the man who said his car was his home. I kept wondering if dismissing that fine was enough. Hope helps, but hope without direction can fade quickly. During the break, the assistant U.S. attorney knocked and stepped inside. He closed the door gently behind him. That alone told me this wasn't casual. He didn't sit right away. He stood there for a moment and said, "Your Honor, I wanted you to know you did the right thing yesterday." I nodded but didn't respond. Praise doesn't interest me. Truth does. He told me he had been observing court proceedings as part of a broader initiative. He said they were studying how minor violations affect vulnerable populations: homelessness, poverty, mental health. He said my courtroom interaction had been noted. I leaned forward. He told me something that caught me off guard. He said the man whose fine I dismissed had actually been flagged in a city database, not for criminal behavior, for outreach. I asked him to explain. He said social services had tried to locate the man multiple times to offer housing assistance, but they could never find him consistently. No permanent address, no phone number that stayed active. The system had failed to catch up with his reality. I felt my throat tighten. He said when the man showed up in my courtroom, it created a fixed point, a moment where agencies could finally connect. He said dismissing the fine didn't just relieve pressure, it opened a door. I sat back slowly. I asked him what kind of help was available. He told me about emergency housing vouchers, job placement programs, caseworkers, none of it guaranteed, all of it fragile. But it was something. I thought about the man's words. I'm still here. That means I still have a chance. I told the assistant U.S. attorney that laws must protect order, but systems must protect people. He nodded. He said that was exactly why he wanted to speak with me. After he left, I sat quietly in my chambers. I stared at the same spot on the wall I've stared at for years when I'm thinking deeply. I realized something then. Sometimes mercy isn't the end of justice. It's the beginning of it. Court resumed shortly after. The room filled again. Life continued. But then, just before lunch, I noticed movement near the back of the courtroom. I looked up and saw 2 city officials speaking quietly with Christina. She glanced at me and nodded slightly. Something was happening. She leaned in and told me the man was still in the building. Social services had arrived. They were hoping to speak with him. I felt a surge of emotion I didn't expect. I asked her to bring him back in. When he stepped forward again, he looked confused, nervous, like he was afraid he'd done something wrong. I immediately told him he hadn't. I explained what was happening. I told him there were people here who wanted to help, not punish, help. He looked overwhelmed. He asked if this was real. I told him it was. I watched his hands shake, not from fear this time, from disbelief. A caseworker introduced herself. She spoke gently. She explained the options: temporary housing, a safe place to park at night, access to showers, food assistance, steps towards something more permanent. The man looked at me like he needed confirmation. I nodded. I said, "This is what happens when you show up and tell the truth." Tears rolled down his face. He covered them with his hands. I didn't rush him. Everyone in the room waited, even the officers. That moment felt bigger than the law. It felt human. Afterward, I dismissed him again, not as a defendant this time, but as a person being seen. As he walked out, I thought about how close he came to being crushed by a system that wasn't built for him, and how easily he could have disappeared if he hadn't shown up. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. I looked around my courtroom and addressed everyone there. I said, "Let me tell you something I've learned in 40 years. The law should never make it harder for someone to survive." The room was silent. That afternoon, after court adjourned, I returned to my chambers feeling emotionally exhausted, but also strangely hopeful, like something had aligned the way it was supposed to. I thought about the woman who scoffed earlier, about how she had everything and still lacked empathy. I wondered what lesson she would take from what she saw. I realized then that justice teaches in different ways, sometimes through kindness, sometimes through consequence, and sometimes just through example. That night when I went home, I told my wife about what happened. I told her about the outreach workers, about the man's tears, about the look in his eyes when he realized help was real. She listened quietly and then said, "That's why you still do this." She was right, but the story wasn't finished yet, because a few weeks later something arrived that reminded me just how far a single moment of compassion can travel. In the weeks that followed, my courtroom returned to its familiar rhythm. New cases, new faces, new stories unfolding one by one. But some moments don't fade just because time moves forward. They stay with you, quietly, persistently. I found myself thinking about that man more often than I expected. I wondered where he was sleeping now. I wondered if the help he was offered had reached him in time. When you've been on this bench as long as I have, you learn that good intentions mean nothing without follow-through. One afternoon, Christina walked into my chambers holding an envelope. She told me it had come from the city outreach office. I took it from her and sat down slowly. Inside was an update. They told me the man had accepted temporary housing, nothing fancy. A small room, a shared bathroom, a door that locked, a bed that didn't move when you shifted your weight. The letter said he slept for nearly 12 hours his first night there. That detail stayed with me. It also said he had been connected with a job counselor. Someone was helping him update his resume, helping him plan next steps, slowly, carefully, at his pace. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. I thought about how close he had come to slipping through every crack in the system, and how showing up to court, something so many people avoid, had changed the trajectory of his life. I thought again about the fine I dismissed. People sometimes ask me if I worry about setting a bad example when I show compassion. The truth is, I worry far more about setting a bad example when I don't. A few days later, something else happened that reminded me why this work matters. Christina came in with a smile that told me everything before she even spoke. She said the man was back in the building. He wanted to see me. I asked her to bring him in. When he walked into my chambers, I almost didn't recognize him at first, not because he looked like a different person, but because he carried himself differently. His shoulders were back, his eyes were clearer. He looked rested. He told me he wanted to thank me again. I gently told him he didn't owe me anything. He said he knew that. He just wanted me to know what had happened since that day. He told me about the room, about sleeping without fear of being told to move, about waking up without checking his surroundings. He told me how strange it felt to have a place to put his shoes. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. He told me he was working more consistently now, that not having to worry about where he'd sleep made everything else easier. That hope, real hope, changes how you move through the world. I listened quietly. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He said he wanted me to have it. I unfolded it carefully. It was a handwritten note. He wrote that no one had treated him like he mattered in a long time. He wrote that standing in my courtroom and being listened to reminded him that he was still human, still worthy. I had to pause before responding. I felt my throat tighten. I removed my glasses and rubbed my eyes. I'm not ashamed to admit that. I told him something I believed deeply. I said, You didn't get help because of me. You got help because you told the truth and showed up." He nodded. Before he left, he said something I'll never forget. He said, "For the first time in a long time, I don't feel invisible." After he walked out, I sat alone in my chambers for a long time. I thought about how often people mistake homelessness for failure, how they forget the role of luck, timing, and support, how easily dignity can be stripped away. I thought about my father again, about the nights he worried, about how close he came to losing everything more than once, and about how one person's kindness can change a family's future. A few weeks later, I received another envelope. This one was thinner, simpler. Inside was a short letter. It was from the man. He wrote that he had started saving. Not much, but something. He wrote that he hoped to move into a small apartment within the year. He wrote that he still kept his car, but now it was just a car again. That line stopped me. Just a car again. He ended the letter by saying something that reminded me why words matter. He wrote, "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." I placed that letter carefully in my drawer. I keep letters like that, not as trophies, as reminders, because on hard days when the weight of this job feels heavy, those reminders matter. I've learned something over 40 years. The law is powerful, but hope is fragile. And when the two work together, lives can change. I also learned that day that compassion doesn't weaken authority. It strengthens trust. It tells people the system hasn't forgotten them. As I prepared to leave that evening, I looked around my empty courtroom. The benches were silent, the lights dimmed, but the lesson of that day echoed loudly, and I knew the story still had one more chapter to tell. I still think about that man from time to time. Not every day, but often enough. Certain stories stay with you because they remind you why this job exists in the first place. After 40 years on this bench, those reminders matter more than anything else. People assume judges see the world in black and white, right and wrong, guilty and innocent. But the truth is, most of life lives in the gray, and justice, real justice, has to live there too. A few months after that day, I received one last update from the outreach office. The man had moved into a small studio apartment. Nothing fancy, just a single room, a small kitchen, and a bathroom of his own. But to him, it was everything. I sat quietly in my chambers when I read that. I removed my glasses and held the paper in my hands. I thought about how easily that outcome could have been different. How one unpaid fine, one missed court date, one moment of fear could have pushed him further into the margins. Instead, he showed up. That's something I wish more people understood. Showing up matters, even when you're scared, especially when you're scared. I learned that he kept his car, not because he needed to live in it anymore, but because it reminded him where he came from. He said it kept him humble. It kept him grateful. That stayed with me. I also learned he started volunteering once a week at a local shelter. He said he wanted people there to see someone who made it out, someone who understood, someone who didn't judge. I leaned back in my chair when I heard that and smiled to myself. That's how change spreads, not through speeches, through example. Now let me stop here for a moment and ask you something. Do you think I was right to dismiss that fine, or do you think I should have enforced the rule no matter what? I'm genuinely curious what you think. And here's another question for you. If you were sitting where I sit, wearing these robes, what would you have done? Would you have shown mercy, or would you have delivered punishment without flexibility? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I actually read them, every single one. You know, people sometimes ask me what keeps me going after all these years, why I still care, why I still listen, why I still believe. It's because of moments like this, moments when the law doesn't just correct behavior but restores dignity, moments when someone who felt invisible walks out of a courtroom standing taller than when they walked in. That's not weakness, that's strength. If this story meant something to you, If it reminded you that compassion still has a place in this world, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Turn on that bell icon so you never miss another story from my courtroom. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who might be struggling, someone who might feel invisible, someone who needs to be reminded that their story isn't over. And check out the next video on your screen. I've got another incredible story from my courtroom that you won't believe. I'll see you tomorrow with another lesson about justice, respect, and what really matters in this life. I'm Frank Caprio. I've been on this bench for 40 years because I believe something simple. We're all equal before the law, every single one of us. Rich or poor, housed or homeless, powerful or powerless. That belief is what makes this system work. Thank you for listening to my story. God bless you. And remember this, respect costs nothing, but it's worth everything.